Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adam Smith. I'm an assistant state attorney. On behalf of the state attorney's office, it's a privilege and an honor to be with you here today. I thank you for your time and I thank you for your attention to this case. This case is about how the defendant, Susan Lorincz, shot a bullet through her own locked front door and killed her unarmed neighbor, Ms. Ajike Owens. You're going to hear in this case why this happened. You're going to hear about Susan Lorincz. You're going to hear about Miss Owens. They call her Ajike Owens. You're going to hear that she has young children. There are two children that are going to come up in this case. Her young sons, Isaac Williams and Israel. You're going to hear why this shooting happened. Susan and Ajike were neighbors. They lived in a neighborhood that had quadruplexes in it, apartments. Susan lived across the street from Ajike. Next to Susan was a field. It wasn't on her property, but it was a field that was next to another apartment building. There were lots of children in this neighborhood. And a lot of those children, including Ms. Owens' children, played in that field. You're going to learn about some problems in this case, some issues between the defendant and Ms. Ajike Owens. You're going to hear that there were arguments between the two of them in the past, leading up to the shooting. You're going to hear what those arguments were about, the dog, the children. And you're going to hear that there were arguments between the two of them, multiple, but those arguments ended, and everyone went their separate ways. And in this case, you are going to hear in detail the shooting that happened on June 2nd, 2023. You are going to learn about the events leading up to the shooting. You're going to learn that that night, it was a Friday night, a summer night, and there were kids playing in the field next to Miss Lorinc's residence. They were playing in the field, and there was an adult with them, Mr. Franklin Cologne. And you're actually going to see the children and Mr. Cologne in the field playing. Why are you going to see them? Because the Marion County Sheriff's Office, in this case, took the defendant's phone, and were able to get videos that the defendant took of the kids playing in the field. Ms. Lorincz was filming the kids and Mr. Cologne in the field on her patio, and then inside her house through windows. You're going to see these videos. You're going to see the kids playing. The kids finished playing as it got darker, a little bit before 9 o'clock. There's not many kids in the field anymore, but yet the defendant, Ms. Lorincz, is still filming. What's she recording? Well, you're going to see that video too from her cell phone. She is videotaping roller skates that were left in the grass, according to her, about 5 or 6 feet from a sidewalk that lives up to her apartment. And in this roller skate incident, Ms. Owens, Ajike's sons, were there. And the defendant has an interaction with them, has a roller skate in her hand, talking to them, and ends up throwing the roller skate. And says, "Here, go fetch." You're going to see where the roller skates were. But the interactions with the children didn't end there at the roller skates. There was another interaction right thereafter involving children of Ms. Owens. where the defendant, she says in her statement to the detectives, which you will hear, that she is on her patio pavement area with an umbrella, telling the kids to leave, talking with her hands, while the kids, about 5 to 7 feet away from her, or in her words, not even close to her. It's at this point, after videotaping the kids, after videotaping the roller skates, after throwing the roller skates, after waving the umbrella around, interacting with these kids, you will hear that Susan calls 911. You're going to hear that 911 call. Pay attention to that 911 call. In the 911 call, you're going to hear Susan complaining about the kids trespassing, leaving toys, screaming, yelling. She's going to say that one of the kids accused her of taking an iPad. Then she's going to accuse the kids of mouthing off to her, the kids saying they're going to beat her up, they're going to get somebody to kill her. And she calls 911. Now that 911 call is made just before 9 o'clock. And on the 911 call, the dispatcher informs Ms. Lorincz that they will send a unit out. And Ms. Lorincz confirms that she is now in her house with her door. It is at this point, after Susan calls 911 on the kids, she's in her room, in her apartment with the door locked, that Ajike Owens comes into the picture. You're going to hear testimony from Uriel Rodriguez. He's a child. You're also going to hear testimony from Sheriff Gardner. He's an adult. But they also live in the neighborhood nearby. They were outside that evening. And you're going to hear testimony about Ajike walking over after this interaction between Ajike's children and the defendant, the roller skates and all. You're going to hear about how Ajike walked over to Susan's residence. She was angry as she was walking over, but she was unarmed. And you're going to hear testimony of Ajike at the door of Susan. She's angry. She's banging on the door. She's yelling. She's even cussing. People are going to say that. That's what was seen. That's what was heard. You're even going to hear from a neighbor, Miss Yvonne Costa, who lives right next to Susan, of what she heard in her own apartment and how the banging was loud. You're going to hear this evidence. While this Ajike is banging on the door, you're also going to hear then a gunshot happens while Ajike is still outside. And while you're here that Ajike was outside banging on the door, saying things to Miss Owens, to the defendant, Miss Lorincz, Ajike doesn't go for the door. Doesn't try to break into the room, the apartment of Miss Lorincz. But yet there is still a gunshot that strikes unarmed Ajike Owens there on the defendant's patio. She runs off the patio, falls in the grass, and dies from the gunshot. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no question in this case that Ajike Owens was shot by the defendant. The defendant admits in her interview to Detective Stitt that she fired her loaded pistol and killed and shot through the door, the locked door, and hit Miss Owens. The Marion County Sheriff's Office collected the .380 pistol that Susan used to shoot Ajike. It was found in a trash can in Susan's bedroom. They found the shell casing inside Miss Susan's apartment. You're going to hear the medical examiner, Dr. Chandel Norford, perform an autopsy on Ajike. She found a projectile inside Ajike's body. You're going to hear from Jamie Williams from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that said the projectile that was found in the body of Ajike and the shell casing that was found inside Susan's apartment all came and were fired from the gun that was also collected inside Susan's apartment in the trash can. There is no question that Susan Lorincz fired a bullet through her locked front door and killed Miss Owens. The question in this case is whether the defendant was justified in doing this. The defendant gives a statement to detectives, two different statements. Some long statements. You're going to hear those. And you're going to hear the defendant say many things. You're going to hear the defendant say what happened leading up to the incident. And you're going to hear the defendant say that she was in fear. That's why she called 911. But you're also going to hear the defendant, and pay attention to the defendant's interview, is that when she was with the kids, with the roller skates, or with the umbrella, that incident, the kids tell her, "I'm going to tell my mom." And the defendant says, "Go tell your mom. I don't care." The defendant says that. Then you're going to go on and say the defendant was such in fear of Ajike Owens because of these prior incidents. But yet she says, "Go tell your mom. I don't care." You're hearing the defendant talk about calling 911 before Ajike Owens comes over to her house. And again, you're going to hear that 911 call. And I have time for that 911 call to listen. Because at the end of the defendant's complaints in that 911 call, out of the blue, you are going to hear this at the end. The defendant says, because what's going to happen is his mom's going to go out, wait for the officer, and run and say, "Oh, I was threatening her kids," which just isn't true. Out of the blue, she says that. Because that's believed what she thought was going to happen. So the defendant will make statements about leading up to the incident. Then the defendant is going to state what happened inside her residence when Ajike was there at the door. The defendant is going to say multiple times that she was in fear. Multiple times. But the defendant is going to describe what actually took place. The defendant is going to say she was actually in the bathroom when she heard the bang. Then she goes out from the bathroom. She goes out to the door and she hears that it's Ajike. Despite being so scared, she then goes back in to the bathroom to finish washing her hands. Then banging starts again. She goes out, this time into the kitchen for the phone, and then the banging won't stop. She's saying things to Ajike, telling Ajike to leave. And then the defendant goes into her bedroom, grabs the loaded firearm, then walks all the way back out to the locked front door, and the police are on the way as she's been told. She points at the door, fires one shot at the center of the door, killing Miss Ajike Owens. You're going to hear the defendant say that Ajike kept saying she was going to kill him. There will be testimony from other witnesses who are outside who did not hear that. And it's important to know that from the time that Susan Lorincz ended the phone call with her door locked inside her own apartment, knowing the police were coming, until the time the defendant, or Ajike Owens, is shot, is within only 2.5 minutes. You're going to hear a lot of things the defendant says. You're going to hear the defendant talk about prior incidents with Ajike Owens. You're going to hear the defendant claim that an incident that happened approximately 16 shooting that Ajike attacked her with the no trespassing. But you're also going to hear from Morgan Robinson, another child who was there that day, and what she saw. You're also going to hear from Deputy Jonathan Coleman, who responded to that call, and that no arrest was made. You're going to hear evidence about an incident where the defendant called 911 about 6 months before the shooting, complaining about the kids. Deputy Kinsey arrived. You're going to hear from Deputy Kinsey. And that the defendant first complains about the kids trespassing and then makes a statement that Mom came over here, was banging on the door, said, "Come to my kids again, I'm going to drag you out, beat you." Long interview with the defendant and Detective Stith, and listen closely, because nowhere in that interview does the defendant talk about this threat of being dragged out and beaten that she says happened 6 months ago. He doesn't talk about it. The defendant is going to talk about the 911 call she made right after shooting Ajike Owens, and you're going to hear that 911 call. In that 911 call, you're going to hear the defendant crying. You're going to hear the defendant say that she thought Ajike was going to break down the door. But you're also going to hear the defendant, in the middle of this, complain about trespassing, about leaving garbage around the house, kids. And she's going to talk about how Ajike had a broken down Honda that was garbage. In the middle of the 911 call, she just says that. You're going to hear the crime, but you're also going to see Deputy Barbosa's body cam, and you're going to hear Deputy Barbosa's testimony on the witness stand, and see one of the initial responding officers to the scene. How he goes right up to the door. Susan Lorincz comes out of the door. She's detained, and she's not crying. And she just wants to make sure that the door is closed so her cats don't get out. You're going to hear the defendant say that she's shot by the kitchen table. But you're also going to see pictures from the sheriff's office, lasers, trajectory rods, to help you determine where the defendant actually was when she was shot. You're going to hear the defendant talk about how her door wasn't secure. But you're going to hear from the defendant's landlord, Charles Gabbard, talk about the repairs that he had made to the door prior to this incident and how the door was secure. You're going to hear the defendant say that she feared for her life. And that she thought she shot because she thought it was either going to be her or it was going to be Ajike. But yet you're also going to hear the defendant say that she never even intended to hit Ajike when she shot. You're going to hear the defendant say that Ajike was at the door. The defendant believed that Ajike was going to break down that door and kill her. But you're also going to hear the defendant say that Ajike was at the door that evening saying, "I'm talking to you because I don't like the way you're talking to my sons." At the end of this case, you're going to hear that the defendant, Susan Lorincz, knowing the police were coming, was in her apartment with the door locked and shot through that locked front door and killed Ajike Owens, who was unarmed. We're going to present the evidence to you in this case. And after the evidence is presented, we are going to come back to you and ask that you find the defendant guilty of manslaughter by use of fire. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Carranza, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir. May it please the court.